Welcome to Buddha at the Gas Pump. My name is Rick Archer. Buddha at the Gas Pump is an ongoing series of interviews with spiritually awakening people. I believe that today's guest is number 365, which means if I had done them every day of the year, we would have been doing this for a whole year straight. Today's guest is James Eaton. James is in the UK in a place called Totnes. Is that the way you pronounce it, James?
Everyone says Totnes, but apparently it's supposed to be Totnes.
Okay,
So,
Totnes. It almost sounds like it should be in Spain or something. In any case, I would just say a couple quick more general things before we get started. I just like to say every time when I do one of these interviews that if you've never seen one of these before, there are, as I just said, a whole bunch of them. And if you go to batgap.com, B-A-T-G-A-P, and look under the past interviews menu, you'll find them all organized and categorized in various ways, so you can check out previous ones. This whole thing is made possible by the support of appreciative viewers and listeners. And if you appreciate it and feel like supporting it, there's a PayPal button on the site. So let me properly introduce James. So James Eaton lives in the UK. He'll tell us his story about how he, well, why don't you just start telling it, James? Because your little bio that you sent me is so sort of personal and informal that you might as well just tell the story. Growing up, deep sense of dissatisfaction and so on. Let's just start with that.
Yeah, I mean, it's the classic tale, Rick. You know, just having that deep sense of dissatisfaction. And I mean, from an early age, I kind of knew I was playing a game. I mean, from a very early age, I remember always being very driven, but looking at the kind of adults around me, I'm just wondering, why are you pretending? Why is everyone pretending? You know? But you see, you know, when I got to about 9 or 10, I was pretending too. I'd sort of gone into the game. Mm-hmm. And somewhere I knew I was pretending, but you know, you just can't understand what's going on there at such a young age.
Did you have a feeling like you were getting sucked into it, like blinders were being put over your eyes and you were trying to prevent that from happening?
Absolutely. I just found myself, rather than people say as you get older, you know, everything expands and your options open, I was feeling like the opposite was happening.
Shutting down.
Yeah, and what I was doing, I was starting to play a role, you know, like most of us seem to do. Deep down feeling very insecure and wanting to kind of open up and be fully seen and expressed and, you know, all those wonderful things. But every time that kind of impetus would rise up, a kind of shutting down and a fear of expressing myself. And so this kind of inattention sort of building up.
Were any adults telling you that you shouldn't be so expressive or that you should, you know, put yourself in a box? Were you hearing that kind of advice from people?
I would not in an explicit way, but I would say in my environment, it was implicit.
Yeah.
And you know, so what I started to do was be very clever. You know, that was my way of kind of shielding this kind of inner insecurity. And I because I'm very driven, I always have been very driven. There was this willpower sort of pushing. And so that got behind whatever I was doing. So I did very well in like academic stuff at school, for example. I got into music, playing guitar. Well, that's an interesting sort of sidetrack there, because I had a friend at school, and I remember going back to his house, and his brother was a musician. He came in with an acoustic guitar, and he kind of sat on the sofa and just started strumming it. And then straight away it was like, you know, you get those moments where something starts jangling.
Yeah.
You know, it's like, whoa, this
is the coolest thing you'd ever seen, right?
Yeah, the coolest thing I've ever heard and ever seen. And that was it was like touching something far beyond this kind of being authentic character I was presenting. So I kind of got really into guitar, and that was kind of like my outlet, you know, to find some sanity, I guess. Mm-hmm. Yeah, but I put my willpower behind that too. So, you know, there was a band, and we used to play gigs and stuff. And So that was, that was me by the time I got to, I guess, 18, I had great results in exams. I got into a top university. It was like from the outside, it was like, yeah, this guy's got it all going on,
You went to Oxford and majored in mathematics, it looks like.
That's right. Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's right. And but if I'm honest, beneath that surface, I was a mess. Very insecure, feeling shameful, guilty. It was like deficient, the classic selection of descriptions. But so I went to university. I had a good time. I enjoyed it. But by then I was cottoning on to my game. I thought when I left, it was like, well, what do I do now? Do I carry on playing my game? And now I just carry on as in a career and all the rest of it, but just carry on the same pretense that I was putting up? Or do I say, well, hold on a second, I'm going to look into this.
Mm-hmm. You got into, well, are we skipping? You got into being an actor and a school teacher, or are we?
Yeah. So that came a bit later. So yeah. I basically when I left Oxford, I basically went on the dole. In England, that means you sign on, you're not working.
Oh, you're like a
income support.
Yeah, you're a no good freeloader. Yeah.
Yeah, well, yeah, exactly. There's a Cockney rhyming slang for it. It's called the rock and roll, like the dole, the rock and roll. Right. And I literally was on the rock and roll because basically me and a group of friends, we basically had a band, and we were trying to get a record deal and do that whole thing. So, that's where I found myself, and I did that for a few years, really putting the willpower behind it. And we had a certain amount of success, but it didn't go big style, And like a lot of these things, if they don't progress, everything starts to kind of implode. Yeah. So that kind of fell apart. And I was living in Oxford at the time, so then I moved after that to London. Mm-hmm. And it was just kind of a bit lost, really, just working in bars and, going out, partying, experimenting with life in all forms. In other bands and, just kind of, floating. And then that's when I decided to go to drama school. Basically, Rick, I was going through my list. I was going through my list, like what is going to solve this, whatever it is. How am I going to get through this?
Meanwhile, no inkling that spirituality might be
not at this point. None at all. Like my only meeting with spirituality was my mum's Christian, so I went to Sunday school, and like many people, like the way it's presented, it's just like another load of beliefs to take on, and the kind of real beauty in it was completely lost on me, and it was just another no thank you, Yeah, really. I mean, although I would say, all throughout my life I've always had this sense of something much, much greater, like many of us do, but just no way of kind of understanding it.
Yeah, you didn't know what it was.
There was just nothing and no one and nothing around me to just kind of pick up on that glint in the eye, and just go, oh, James, come, maybe read this or look at this, or, just none of that really. So, I was just left to my own devices. So, so I did the rock and roll thing, then that didn't work.
Just out of curiosity, for kind of an irrelevant question, but what sort of rock were you doing? Were you like heavy metal, or were you more like folksy, bluesy kind of?
Yeah, melodic.
Harmonies.
Sort of melodic rock. Yeah, harmonies.
Good.
Beatlesy sort of.
That kind of stuff.
Nice crafted songs and harmonies and
stuff I would have appreciated.
It was around. I don't know if you remember. This must have been in the 90s, I guess. Yeah, 90s. So we had this whole thing in the UK called Britpop.
No, I wasn't really.
It was bands like Blur and Oasis and Suede and all these.
You got to
It was that.
You got to move back about 3 decades before I can really talk to you about the Beatles, the Who.
Yeah, well,
those
I
kind
can
of groups.
appreciate that stuff too. Yeah. Yeah, so it was that kind of music. Yeah, so that that didn't provide the satisfaction I was looking for, basically, ultimately. And so my next on my list was something I always sort of wondered about, was acting.
Mm-hmm.
So I having no experience at all, I did a little bit when I did do a music. I was in a musical when I was at Oxford. West Side Story, actually.
Oh, was it? Oh, cool.
I was Riff.
Ah, he was the shark or jet?
He was the jet.
Okay.
When you're a jet, you're a jet all the way. All that stuff.
You know who happens to live in Fairfield, who's a friend of mine, is Richard Beamer, who played Tony in the movie.
Tony, okay.
Yeah, he's an old-time meditator and lives here in Iowa, in our town.
Right. Yeah, it's a great movie. I love that. Yeah. My favorite musical, definitely. Yeah, so I auditioned, and I'm a place called Lambda, London Academy of Music and Dramatic Art, and was offered a place on their course. So I went and did that, and actually that was the beginning, I think, of this journey. Yeah, because to be a good actor, you have to be able to be vulnerable, in the moment, not planning everything and gripping onto your kind of conclusions that you've already made. So, in a way, I was hopeless, which was great because it kind of smashed me to pieces. It was like my attempt to present myself was being severely undermined. So, and by this time I was about 25, I think. So there were other people there that were a lot younger, like 19, 20, 21, and they didn't have such a hang up. So they were like really flying, and it was like suddenly from used to being sort of top of the class, I was bottom,
Yeah, the old fogey.
Yeah, old fogey, but also really stuck in my ways, So that was a really great sort of introduction into sort of looking inward, in a sense, and seeing, well, why am I being like this, and starting to be more vulnerable in the moment, not having to fix everything, and also, the feeling, the kind of feelings of fear when they come up, and not being kind of overridden by that, not shutting down when those feelings are coming up, but actually sort of meeting it and really expanding into it. So these are invaluable things. I think everyone would really benefit, actually, from like at least a year at drama school. And it really very challenging.
It must actually loosen you up a lot. Because you have to. Yeah. I know that you do all sorts of exercises to get out of your mold, to get out of your set way of functioning, and to try on different personalities. So it must culture some kind of flexibility.
I think so. Improvising, for example, so for most people that's just terrifying. You're standing in front of a group of people with no idea, you're just saying yes to whatever's happening. So that was a really sort of mind-opening experience for me. And then when I left drama school, I actually was in the business for a few years, and it was it was great, actually, because I have musical skills as well. That means I was sort of more employable. I used to do sort of rep work where you'd have a few plays and a musical. So if someone can play drums, guitar, sing, you can kind of save yourself 2 people. We can get 2 for the price of 1 for the price of 2, but 2 for the price of 1. Certainly not 1 for the price of 2. Yeah. So that was great. But I used to love the kind of heightened nature of it, going on stage, big audiences. But after a while, I just this same kind of feeling, no, this isn't it, this is great, but it's not it. And whenever that used to come, I used to move on very quickly. I wouldn't hang around, sort of like relationships. Some people get a sense that it's over, and then it can take a sort of year or 2 to kind of fully admit that and move on. But I've always been very, as soon as I know, and then it's like, well, there's no point in staying in this anymore. We're just wasting each other's time. So my kind of affair with the acting world sort of came to an end, and then I just thought, well, what else? What am I going to do now? You know? And then last thing on my list was, oh, well, I'll just teach. I'll be a teacher, school teacher. So I retrained, and then I went and worked in a city London school. So it's a very challenging school. And I was teaching maths. So I went back to that, which was, you know, such a weird juxtaposition. You know, we've got drama, which is all about, you know, not knowing, freedom in the moment, vulnerability, and this sort of maths, which is this kind of logical structure, you know, that's kind of solid like a rock, you know.
Yeah. Well, it's good you're exercising different faculties, you know.
Certainly was, yeah. So yeah, that was really great. I enjoyed that. I love the kids, the energy of the kids, that kind of vitality, you know. And I actually enjoyed sort of presenting maths in a way that I felt they could really connect with, because I think so many people have such bad experience of maths, you know, when they're at school. And, you know, when people, I always hear it with people, when I was young, when I used to say, oh yeah, I'm doing a maths degree, they just go like, ah! You know, it's like I'd said a bad word, you know, because most people's experience is very bad. Because, I mean, think about maths, what you could do is, let's take something really simple, I don't know, like, say doing circles, you know, like circumference is pi times diameter. So the teacher comes in and they just write that on the board, and they just chuck out the textbooks and they go, right, do some problems. And it's like, well, who's learning anything there? It's just feels like a complete waste of time. So I used to try and do things like, if all the kids come in with tins and stuff, circular objects, draw around them, and then you have a bit of string, and they kind of go around the circle with the string, measure it, then measure the diameter of that, and you have a table on the board or something, and everyone just fills in their values, you know, and then you get them. Well, you might just sort of whisper to one kid, you know, don't not announcing it, just but whisper, why don't you divide them, see what you get, you know. So they divide it and they get this number 3 point something, and they do it. What about that one? And do it again. And then suddenly you just, as a teacher, you just stand back and you watch this kind of like wave going through the class as they start realizing they're getting the same number over and over again. No matter what size the circle is, it's the same number. And it's like, what the hell's going on? And then you get one of the kids to go up and like Google it, you know, 3 point whatever, what is this number? And then
it's pi.
This pi symbol comes up on the screen, you know.
That's neat.
And then this one's like, whoa. It's like they're touching into something mysterious, you know. Well, it's even called a transcendental number, isn't it? So.
Yeah, you know, and while we're on that point, I know that some mathematicians and others have marveled at the fact that the universe somehow is mathematical, that we even understand mathematical laws, and that they correlate with things in the physical universe. Have you ever thought about that? I mean, does it ever sort of evoke a sense of awe and wonder in you, or some sense of divine intelligence that's orchestrating things, and that has given this language that enables us to understand the universe from a certain angle?
Yeah, I mean that's. I mean, we can get onto this as we go through. I mean, that's a way of looking at it.
Yeah. And
it certainly strikes you when you're teaching this stuff. Think, you know, ratios like the golden ratio, and you know, spirals, how spirals come out of that, and then you see it in sunflower patterns, and
and seashells and galaxies, and
exactly. It's really fascinating. Even in the helixical structure of the DNA, there's a kind of a ratio of the golden ratio in that. Even if you measure your digits, your fingers and your arms, you can get a ratio there. In fact, we used to do this. I used to do a little lesson like that, and I had on the internet you can find this like face made out of golden ratios, and then you can put different famous faces behind it to see how they match up or not, as the case may be. And there is a strange kind of beauty when there was a Russian model, and her face almost matched it perfectly. And you look at the face, and it wasn't like a sexy face, it was just, there was something really sort of beautifully pure about it that was very, yeah, it was really something. So yeah, I mean, it certainly can inspire that awe and wonder, and I certainly saw that in the kids, and I had it myself a bit when I was, particularly A-level maths. I think university, it got so conceptual that I mean, I realised at university I wasn't really a mathematician, you know. You know what I mean? Like, especially there where I went, you start to meet people who really are geniuses, you know, and you're okay, all right, okay, you know, I can get this stuff, but I'm not on that level.
Not one of those, yeah. Both in terms of the genius and perhaps in terms of the nerd value.
Yeah, right, yeah, yeah.
I met Brian Josephson one time, the physicist, and you know, such a genius. He got the Nobel Prize, and he was such an odd character, you know, just so eccentric, just kind of caught up in his world, in his mind.
Yeah, amazing, yeah.
Yeah.
Certainly, there was a few like that when I went to Oxford, definitely. Yeah. So yeah, so in the end, the maths, the teaching thing, you know, the same thing happened. I did it for 3 years, and it's very exhausting as well. I mean, I take my hat off to teachers out there, you know, absolutely total respect, you know, because the energy that it sucks out of you, especially in those inner city schools, you know, every second of the day you're kind of on something, you know, it's just exhausting.
Yeah. Just want to throw in here that there's some nice programs where they're teaching meditation to inner city school kids and getting incredible results, you know, just huge reductions in you know, violence and misbehavior things, and dropouts, and much better grades, and all kinds of stuff. So, and it must be a lot easier on the teachers too. Yeah,
right. Yeah, I mean, I used to find getting kids respect was the best way of controlling classes, rather than, you know, these screaming teachers at the front of the class. It just doesn't, especially in inner city schools, because they'll scream back at you, you know. It's like no problem. So yeah, I mean, actually there's a great Chinese proverb. It's something like, tell me and I'll forget, show me and I may remember, involve me and I will always understand.
That's good.
So that, yeah, exactly. So that, I mean, that goes for the subject we're talking about in terms of the sort of spiritual search as well. For me, it's too much telling and too much kind of, you know, taking it on the word of the teacher, and not enough involving, you know.
Yeah, yeah. A lot of times there's a very rigid hierarchy with the teacher up on a podium, and everybody else sort of, I'll never be like him, you know. And
yeah, there can be that.
A number of teachers who are trying to get around that now and make it much more egalitarian.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, yeah, yeah. So I mean, that's basically what I was trying to do in the maths teaching. I'll just tell you one very quick thing.
Sure.
It was so beautiful. I was doing Pythagoras theorem with a class once, and I did a similar lesson where they would have squares that they fit together, and when the certain squares would fit together, you get a right angled triangle. So this kid in the class, he worked it out, and he, you know, I said, oh great, I think his name was Juha, so we called it Juha's theorem. And he was so excited. He said, yeah, mate, I got a theorem, you know. And then we looked it up on Google, and it came up, oh, Pythagoras' theorem. Oh,
so
he got really disappointed. He said, he got there before me. He was really disappointed. And then this is the best. I heard this kid at the back of class go, Pythagoras, but he was bullied at school.
That's great.
Because they were imagining he was like a kid like them, you know, in some other school in London probably, you know. It's so funny.
Was that Pythagoras, or who was it that was reputed to have discovered some principle in mathematics or physics when his body displaced the bathwater in the tub, and he jumped out and ran through the streets naked, shouting, "Eureka! I've found it."
Yeah, maybe it was him. Yeah,
Yeah,
yeah. He does. There is some Pythagoras cup or something.
might have been him.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, you know, to be honest, like I'm so not sciencey. It's really
Right.
funny we're
Yeah.
talking like this, but well, yeah. Anyway, so you know, in the end of the day, that I realized that that wasn't it either for me. That wasn't where I was going. So it was like I feel like I tried to fit myself into all these different boxes, and I just didn't fit basically. And it was like, well, okay. So this is when I started to get the spiritual kind of direction coming in, and it was actually towards the end of when I was acting, I did a show with it was a Shakespeare Comedy of Errors, and I was Antipholus of Ephesus, I think, and there's an Antipholus of Syracuse, so we're like twins, and everyone mistakes us for each other. That's how the comedy sort of happens. Anyway, he used to go off on a Wednesday, I think it was, after rehearsals, and he used to go off very mysteriously, and I said, where do you go? And he wouldn't tell me, and I actually followed him once, and it ended up being this Gnostic group. Yeah, it was a Gnostic group, sort of Spanish-based thing. So that was my first kind of step into this. I didn't last very long in that group because I ask a lot of questions, and I'm not particularly reverent. You know, I'm not like right. I've always been like, okay, I need to know this. Yeah, I kind of get into trouble.
Good way to be, actually.
I think so, yeah. And then after that, I was in the Gurdjieff group. I think it overlapped a bit. So that was where my sort of things first started to open up for me. So I was reading some of his books, going to this group.
Were you trying to do that self-remembering thing that those people are repeating?
Yeah.
You know, like keep checking in. Am I here?
Yeah. Yeah, that kind of stuff. Yeah. And you know, I mean, I don't know if you know much about. There's some very strange stuff goes on in those groups. You know, people speak very slowly.
Well, yeah, you know, I was a student of Maharishi Mahesh Yogi, and he said that when he first came to England, he met a bunch of Gurdjieff people back in the 60s, and they were all speaking like that. And, you know, and he said, you know, well, why are you talking like that? And they said, well, we're trying to remember the self. And he said, well, why should you not be able to speak properly? And and they said, well, you know, we were taught to sort of keep checking in and remembering. So he said, no. He said self-realization is like taking a shower. You take a shower in the morning, you're clean, you totally forget about it, and it's just there throughout the day. Thinking about it doesn't help to retain it. Forgetting about it doesn't cause you to lose it. It's just not on the basis of any kind of active attention like that.
Yeah, I think it's like all these things, you know, when the teacher dies, you've got people interpreting the teaching, and I think there's a lot of judgment actually. You know, I used to do the movements as well. You know, the movements are fantastic. I love the movements, but you see people getting them wrong, and then they like be chastising themselves for getting it wrong, and it's like, you know, this is just judging yourself, you know, and then judging yourself for judging yourself and all this kind of stuff. Yeah. So I got into trouble again, you know. Had a bit of an altercation with a senior person, but I have to say, you know, I've got a lot. I think Gurdjieff the man was a bit of a genius. I think he was so mischievous, and what my first big kind of awakening, I guess you'd call it, was. Have you ever read that book, that massive book he wrote, Beelzebub's Tales to his grandson?
No.
It's this massive tome, you know, it's like 1,000 and something pages, and it's so wildly crazy. I mean, it's just so out there, you know, these huge words, Hector Parapashinoch, and you know, I can't remember, and it's just so fantastical, but delivered in a kind of this is the way it is sort of thing. You know, for someone like me, just continually trying to get my head around it, but it's just so out there that you just can't get your head around it. So in the end, it just breaks. You know, the whole thing just breaks, and then it's like yeah. So that's the first time when I really sort of realize that there's a presence here. There's a knowing here that's knowing these thoughts. That's knowing these thoughts equally as the sound of this voice, as the colors of Rick on a screen. You know, there's a knowing, and all those attributes are coming and going, shifting and changing, whereas this knowing is just shining always. There it is. So that, I mean, that was just like a bombshell, you know. And I remember my older brother actually came round. I was staying at my grandpa's place. My grandpa, he wasn't very well, and he just moved into a home. And I was basically living in his old house, ripping it apart, like taking out the carpets, stripping the walls. I was literally, you know, I was in an environment where I was ripping everything out. And funny enough, that's exactly what I was doing in the evening. I was just sitting reading books, spiritual books, and this massive Gurdjieff book, and just kind of ripping everything out internally, in the mind as well somehow.
Interesting.
Yeah, and my brother came round to see me, and I just bent his ear off like the whole night, talking about this incredible discovery. Something knows thoughts, you know. You're not thoughts. There's something before thoughts. There's knowing thoughts. And he's like, what's happened to my brother? You know?
Yeah, you on drugs, buddy?
Yeah, and I said to him, you know, my life has changed. My life from now on, my life has changed. You know, I just knew it. This discovery was the beginning of something completely different. So. I still hadn't found non-duality by this point, but
you were onto something.
And yeah, I was onto something, but it felt incomplete because, yes.
Someone just told us it was Archimedes who was the one in the bathtub.
Archimedes.
Yeah.
Of course.
Thank you. Thank you, Serge.
Thank you, Serge.
Yeah, it was Serge that told us.
Yeah, so I can't remember what I was saying now. I'm so
I'm sorry. Yeah, you were. Well, you were onto something. You realized.
I was onto exactly.
Yeah, you realized that there was this presence. You hadn't quite glommed onto non-duality yet, but there was a crack in the cosmic
there was a
egg.
Crack. That's it. That's right. So yeah, of course, what happens, because it's, you know, life as it is starts to kind of creep back in again, doesn't it? And you know, this discovery suddenly is less clear than it was, or you rediscover it again and you rediscover it again. And then also I think I just felt like there's just something else here, because I could still feel that incompleteness, that sense of more, you know. But I think it's really important, this point, because I think a lot of people stop there. They get into this awareness thing, and then they kind of, they think that's it, and they think, oh, I've woken up. There's this awareness here, yeah. And it's this is like first step on the ladder. I mean, you know.
Yeah, I mean, if you've watched many of my interviews, you'll realize that there's a kind of a perennial theme with me, which is that, you know, well, it's the old Zen saying, the beginner's mind, and as Adyashanti says, I consider myself to always be a beginner. So
absolutely.
I don't think personally, I haven't yet seen or come to understand how there could be a final step. It seems like there's always, and I mean, there's a dimension of life that doesn't change, but then one lives, and in the living there can be ever fresh clarity, realization, depth, whatever.
I totally agree with that. When I say first step, I mean, you know, it's not. This is just the beginning of a journey. It's not the end. You know? And what I sort of later began to see, and you know, became part of how I share this message, is that people actually get fixated on that, and it becomes a concept, becomes another concept without even realizing it. They're now conceptualizing awareness and using it as a way of stepping out of life and kind of hiding from the kind of challenge and the messiness of what life offers. So it can actually become a bit of a false refuge as well.
Yeah, I heard you comment in one of your other interviews of, you know, going to non-duality meetings and seeing these people sitting in the back row who were sort of checked out, you know. I mean, they'd gotten into a disassociative kind of state from dwelling on it this way without, continuing to evolve or something.
Yeah, well, that's a good point to make right now, because when I did discover non-duality, because I was looking around now. I mean, I've got a voracious mind, when I get my teeth into something, I'll go 100%,
Yeah.
And so sooner or later I came across non-duality, and so I was hearing these kind of slogans, like nothing to do, there's nowhere to go, there's nothing to get. And like, was people really telling me this stuff, like, really believing it, and yet I could see that they were far from in a place where it's like having found that kind of fulfillment. Do you know what I mean? It's like,
well, yeah, I mean,
what was driving me on was there's something this is unfulfilling.
Yeah, and my take on it is that they've glommed onto a concept, and they've gotten good at speaking those kinds of words. But when you contrast what they're actually living and experiencing,
that's what I mean, exactly.
Yeah, with what's possible, then it's kind of sad in a way.
Yeah, it is very sad, but of course, it's totally ironic as well, because I mean, the reason I brought that in was because I think the people that you were just mentioning, that sometimes at the back of the row there. I mean, these are the people that sometimes tell you this stuff, and it's like they've got stuck in a rut here, because they're telling themselves there's nothing to do. But what they're actually doing is they're suppressing a natural yearning to explore with the belief that there's nothing to do. So they're actually doing nothing. So without even realizing it, they're actually completely contradicting themselves.
I think if we analyze why they say that, it's a kind of a misappropriation of a different level of experience, which they probably haven't attained. But there is a level on which there's nothing to do and nothing that could be done, because there's no doer and so on and so forth. But if that's not the level on which you're living, then there's a saying in the Gita, which is the dharma of another brings danger.
Right.
It's not your dharma, it's not your experience. And even if it were your experience, on some level there's nothing to do, but on other levels there's plenty to do, and you're going to be doing it.
Yeah, exactly. Beautiful. And I would totally agree. I mean, all those phrases, it's all true. Of course it's true. But, exactly like you say, if it's not true for you, then maybe there is something to explore. And I think that's why what I try to bring with the way I speak about this is you can come in at it anywhere. You can come in at it at any level. So, I could be speaking to someone and just someone who's never heard of any of this stuff, and you're just getting them to see that there's something here that's knowing thought. I mean, just something little like that can be really profound for someone who's never even looked into that. And then for someone else, it might be a completely different way of speaking. And there's no qualm, there's no worries about contradicting yourself, because it's right for particular people at particular times. That's just the way it is. So yeah, there's nothing to do. It's true. But
that's an important point. I interviewed this wonderful gentleman named Sri M a couple of days ago. And he was saying about the trickiness of being a teacher, in the sense that you might be talking to 100 people, and yet the people in the room are at all different levels of understanding and development, and it's sort of an art learning to speak in a way that's appropriate to all those people. But he said to really get deeply into something, you actually really need to have a one-on-one, because then you can kind of tune right into where that person is at and what they need.
That's exactly what I do.
Yeah.
I usually have a introduction will be on a group basis, so it'll just be a kind of guided meditation type thing, just bringing people into that place, just easing in, softening into being, and then from there I invite anyone who wants to come up, and then it's like a one-on-one with an audience.
Right.
So it's great actually, because having the audience, it heightens the one-on-one. So
it does. It creates a sort of an ambiance, or a spiritual field, so to speak.
Yeah, and it kind of amplifies whatever the
Yeah.
issue is, you know. So yeah, so I realized there was more. So I wanted to explore more. So I started doing that, and I was living in, I don't know if you know London, in North London, Kentish Town. I had a flat in Kentish Town, which is quite close to Hampstead, and Hampstead is where anyone really who comes to the UK does non-duality meetings. So yeah, I was walking over the Heath like all the time, you know, going to see anyone who stepped foot in the country. Basically, I was there, you know, I was like lapping it up.
My only experience in London, this is just a funny story. I was on my way from Keele University, where I had helped to start a teacher training course for TM teachers, and I was going back to Switzerland, and I spent the night in London in the TM center there, and I was meditating in the morning, and coming out of meditation, I looked over and I saw this button on the table next to me, and I thought, I wonder what that does, and I pushed it, and this fire alarm went off. And the guy who was like running the center totally lost his cool and was screaming and yelling, "We can't get this thing to stop once you start it. Why did you do that, you son of a bitch?" You know? That was my experience of London.
Well, at least I didn't. My partner, she did that. She was on a massage course, and they tried to charge her 200 quid for setting off the fire alarm. She left the course.
That's funny.
Disgusted. Yeah.
Anyway, we're having a very informal interview, as you can tell here. Little stories. But sorry to interrupt. You continue.
Yeah. So you know, I started exploring different teachers, different books, different teaching in the non-duality sort of sphere.
Go around, see Tony Parsons and Rupert Spira and Jeff Foster and all those guys.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, Actually, I didn't see Jeff very much. I saw Tony a few times at the beginning, and then I just found myself sort of looking elsewhere. And Marnie, she was another one.
And Marnie, yeah.
And then Rupert, and you see the great thing, Roger Linden as well, he lived quite near me. But Marnie and Rupert, they were great because they became friends, you know, and that to me is so important.
Yeah.
Because all the bullshit just goes out the window, you know. It's nothing to do with any kind of pretensions or, you know, all that crap are just gone, you know. And I think that's such a gift that someone in that position can give, is to just be a friend, you know. We're just friends. It's really, really beautiful.
Yeah.
Yeah. Actually, I remember going to see Rupert. This is probably 10 odd years ago. He used to be upstairs in this little back room in Colette House. And I remember going once, and I must have been 3 people. And I just remember we were sitting there, and there's this tube train just to keep the tube lines just behind the window, just tube going, and the light just getting darker and darker, and so nobody could be bothered to put the light on. There was just 3 of us and Rupert sitting there in this dark room. It's just like, yeah, it's amazing. He's so popular now. It's wonderful. Really.
Yeah, and rightfully so. He's
absolutely.
He's really clear and very, very sweet guy, and like you say, unpretentious. You know, just a genuine lovely human being, and his wife too is delightful.
Yeah, Ellen, beautiful. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, I'd love to catch up with him again soon, but
I'll be seeing him in a week and a half.
I'll say hi.
Yeah, I will.
Me.
At the SAND conference.
Great. Oh yeah, yeah. Yeah. Well, since I'd moved down to Totnes, I sort of don't see anyone anymore. We're just kind of living in the middle of nowhere and just disconnected from all that. But yeah. So from exploring all those things, you know, then the other part of it started to open up, and I think the way, how do we talk about this? I seem to have got into this pattern. I'm writing a book at the moment, and there's this way in that I've sort of used is, first of all, common sense. Like, what does common sense say? So going back to the awareness thing, the common sense says, you know, you're a person, physical person, you've got a name, a gender, and all the rest of it, you know, and you've got your past and your future to come and past memories and all that kind of stuff. And that's what you are, right? It's simple. That's common sense. Easy. And yet, if you just probe that a little bit further, you say, well, you know, what are you most essentially are, where's that? And most people wouldn't say, well, it's in your legs. You know, if you lost your legs, you'd still feel like you were you somehow, you know? So most people kind of end up here, like what I most essentially are is up here looking through two eyes.
Reminds me of the Cat Stevens song, you know?
Which one?
Yeah, I'm Moonshadow. If
Moonshadow.
I ever lost my legs.
I didn't know he'd written a song about losing his legs.
Check it out, Moonshadow, Cat Stevens.
Yeah, I will. Moonshadow. Yeah, I mean, that's the kind of common sense thing. But then you just start digging a little bit beneath that, and you think, well, let's take the body. You know, as a baby is born. You know, I've got two kids, and seeing them growing in the, well, I didn't see them growing in the womb, but seeing the womb growing, and then the scanning pictures. You know, all these incredibly intricate structures being grown. You know, nobody does that. That's just happening. You don't kind of design the intricate structures of the lungs and stuff. I mean, thank God, you know.
Yeah.
It all just happens. And
you don't do it, but some incredible intelligence is involved there.
But you see the same thing, you know, the skin growing, the nails growing, the hair growing, everything. You know, it's all happening. The heart is beating, the breath. And yet, you know, when we come down to it, out of all these sort of billions of processes, I don't know, trillions of processes, God knows how many processes, there's one that we say, oh no, I'm doing that, at least one anyway, which is thinking. I'm doing thinking. I am thinking. And it's, you know, interesting that. I mean, are you doing, can you find the function that does thinking?
Well, that's an interesting question. I mean, there's this whole free will issue. And obviously there's certain things that we don't do. We don't beat our heart. We don't, you know, we don't do a lot of, we don't run our liver or anything like that, but we do seem to be able to raise our hand or not raise our hand, or speak or not speak. You know, and physiologists talk about the, what is it, the autonomic and the sympathetic and parasympathetic nervous systems or something. So, and a lot of people try to argue that the things that we seem to have control over are actually just as automatic and beyond our control as the heartbeat and the liver function. So, I mean, what's your take on that whole deal?
Well, I mean, my take ultimately is to go right beyond all of that. Mm-hmm. But maybe we'll come to that. I'm just trying to sort of walk in, because, you know, it certainly feels like you choose thoughts. But then if you look for whatever it is that's choosing the thought, all you ever find is another thought. So what's choosing that thought? And you just keep finding another thought. So the thought is just arising. It's literally just arising. Try and find a function, some function that's doing thinking. I mean, if you have a good look, you just find another thought. Where does that come from? So all I'm doing there is just trying to loosen up the sort of conclusion of common sense. And then what some people then do is they grab hold of science, like, right, science will help me out here. But then, of course, you know, our prevailing sort of materialist science will actually confirm that there isn't anyone doing that. There's no, you know, it's a kind of neurophysiological system.
But just to play devil's advocate for a second, let's say somebody's listening to this interview and they feel like, all right, well, I made the choice to listen to this interview, and you guys are talking about this, you know, is there anyone doing it? So right now, I'm going to make the choice to leave this interview and go out for a walk. It's my, or maybe I'll decide to stay here. But either way, it's my choice. And so there is, you know, I perceive that there is a somebody who, although I can't quite put my finger on what it is, but there is something that enables me to choose to do this or that.
Yeah. So the thought that arises, I'm going to press stop on this interview and I'm going to go and walk my dog. There's a thought arising.
Where does it come from?
Yeah, where does it come? It's the same question. I mean, it doesn't matter what the thought is. I'm going to raise my hand. Yeah, so where did the thought come? I'm going to raise my hand. These are just ways of loosening up the certitudes that we have, you know? And if you try and grab hold of science to back your case, it does the opposite. Science is basically saying that we're a sort of an organic machine, basically, that's just, it's like a software program that's just updating. It's got its hardwired DNA structure. That comes from your parents. You didn't choose your parents either. and it's sculpted by environment, and you don't choose that. So it's like the whole thing is just an upgrading system. This is what science would say. So, I mean, that's actually quite useful for people on this path, because it starts to, like I was saying, just kind of loosen things up a bit. But when I really sort of got that, it still felt like, well, no, whatever's here, there's a freedom here. There is a freedom here that doesn't speak to. So that's when we go into this first-hand experiencing. This is the key. This is the sort of beautiful way into exploring this whole area of non-duality spirituality. First-hand, direct, actual experience. So we can do that, like we were speaking earlier about realizing that sounds and sensations and thoughts and feelings are all moving and changing and shifting. But this knowing of that is always present. Here it is, always shining. So that's the kind of key that I then took into this next step of exploring. So that's, you could say we've looked at the subject, the me, and we've seen that what we thought was a subject is actually thoughts, feelings, and sensations that are arising. So the real ultimate subject is this knowing, if you like, this presence. So now what I then like to do is turn it around. So now let's look at the object, because this is the sort of contradiction that I found myself in. Okay, I'm this presence. I can't find where it begins or ends even. And yet this world, still feels like it's outside. So like, this computer and, Rick's over there in America and we're having this conversation. So all of that stuff is still there. So we get this kind of weird contradiction. And that's why I think, for me, it felt incomplete. So then we look at the object. Let's really look at this object. What is this? And I think this is where most people find it most challenging, actually. Because what we're doing is we're seeing that all we ever experience is like a virtual reality. So this again, if I say that, sometimes people go, whoa, whoa. So we walk in gently. So common sense says, like we were just saying, you're what you most essentially are is behind here, looking through eyes at the world. But just to look at that for a second, what we're believing there is that these eyes are windows, and that there's a sort of entity behind them looking through windows at what's out there. But then you could really play devil's advocate with that. You say, well, how is this little entity in the head, how is that seeing? If it's just looking through windows, then you get into this like infinite regress. You need a little entity inside the head of the little entity that looks through its eyes, it looks through these eyes, and you just keep going back. It just doesn't make sense.
What if you do it this way? What if you say, all right, what you are is consciousness, and there's I'll just state it this way, and you can rebut it. But there's a physical apparatus, a mechanics of perception involving senses and so on, and then there are objects of experience, objects of the senses. And so you have a threefold structure. You have perceiver, consciousness, mechanics of perception, and objects of perception. And the perceiver obviously can't perceive himself, because to do so he'd have to be an object and step apart from himself, and that there you get the infinite regress. But he, so to speak, and I'm saying he, it's not a he, can perceive other things. They can fall like images falling on a movie screen. Screen can't perceive itself, but images can fall on the screen and give rise to experience. Does that sort of fit with what you're saying, or would you like to refute that?
So that's a nice model, and if that works for you, go for it. But I found that kind of model didn't work for me. Mm-hmm. There's still a feeling of separateness that evokes, and actually, in a way, the screen does know itself. It does know itself. You can get down to that screen knowing itself.
You can, but isn't it different than the way you know a cup or something? Because the screen is itself. It can't sort of become
Yeah.
two things in order to know itself.
Well, yeah, but where this is leading is that there is no cup. There's only itself.
Uh-huh.
That's where we're going.
So that which appears to be a cup and a pen and a tree
Yeah,
and so on.
it's just
It's
pure
all just consciousness.
Yeah, that's where it's leading. So just going back to that, so we leave that common sense thing behind, and this is really mind blowing, because then people go into, like, let's do science again, like we did before, and what you start to realize is what the scientific position is, which nobody really realizes. I don't think people really think about it. Is that okay? All this sensory data from the outside is being picked up and coming into the physical system, but it's all being fed into the brain, and the brain is dark, and there's no sound or light in a brain. So it's not, I think we have this idea that it's like this, we're streaming all this light into the head and just into, but it's not true. It's like
the brain is interpreting it.
Yeah, it's just electrical signals, electrochemical signals feeding into the brain, where this utter fucking miracle happens, where this explosion of this theater, this cinematic rich experience happens. So, I mean, this is like mind-boggling, because what it means is that what you're seeing now, everyone who's watching this, wherever they are in the world, what they're seeing now is not a real physical reality. It's a kind of collection of perceptions. And if we're sticking with the scientific view, it's a projection of being created by the brain in the mind.
Yeah, now here's an interesting question, not to throw you off track, but let's say you're looking at a tree, and there's also a bird looking at the tree, and there's a dog looking at the tree, and maybe a squirrel or something. And each of them, obviously, if we think about it, is seeing a very different tree, because they have very different perceptual apparatus and ways of interpreting what they perceive. So who sees the real tree?
Yeah,
and
right.
And you could have 1,000 people looking at the tree, and they're all seeing slightly different.
Yeah, I like it.
And so what is the tree exactly if no one actually sees it as it is? Does it have a reality that sort of stands alone in and of itself, that is perfect, and everybody has some kind of degree of appreciation of that, but not the actual thing?
Yeah, right. So that's a philosophical question, because nobody can actually answer that. So this is the wonderful thing. So nobody can step outside of their first-person experience to objectively experience a material world out there to say what that tree actually is. And I mean, that's an extraordinary thing to realize, because what it's basically saying is that the concept of reality that we share conventionally is a concept. It's a philosophy. It's not a kind of actual experience. And this is really like mind-blowing.
And yet we don't want to say that we're all each creating our own reality, because there's an agreement to a certain extent between all the different realities. The squirrel obviously sees some sort of tree the same as we do. He climbs it, we watch it. The bird can fly up and land in it. So they're all identifying an object that's apparently there. And and we could die, and they could still be engaging with the tree. So there's some sort of existence to the tree that seems to be independent of anyone's perception of it.
Yeah, so we can get to that, because these are big questions. So I just want to just pause here at the moment, because I think it's really something that certainly in my kind of journey was really profound. So it's like, so for example, like if you're sitting watching this now, or like for us now, as you sort of move your head around like this, it seems completely obvious that you're moving your head around. Right? But what we're saying is that because your experience is virtual, it's being recreated, that's what you're experiencing, is the movement of colors that gives an as-if impression. Even the little sort of clicks in your neck. I don't know, if you're walking down the street and you're feeling the sort of tingling sensations in your feet, and you feel your feet touching the ground, and you look and around and you see people walking, and you smells and the cars going by. It's all being recreated out of perceptions. I mean, this is really, really important to kind of understand with this whole process, I think. So
Maybe
in terms of distance, like the distance, for example, like you look at a star trillions of kilometers away in the sky at night, and it seems that far away, but your brain isn't bigger than the universe. You couldn't possibly house that distance inside your brain. So it's an appearance. It's the appearance of distance. Just like as I move my hand in and out of this screen now, it looks like it gets closer and bigger and further away. But from the point of view of your computer screen right now, there's just colors. So, I mean, this is fundamental, right? Because if you don't start to kind of feel into this, then you'll always have this sense of separateness between the knowing presence and what's appearing.
So I think I was about to ask you, so what's the practical value of this philosophical discussion we're having? And you just sort of said it, that if you can really feel into this, then you can kind of begin to sense the unity of things. Yeah.
Exactly, because now look, I'm looking at my hand, right? So now we've been talking about computer screens and things, but it's true of my hand too. This is colors with sensation that create this experience. Yeah. And so your actual body and your thoughts, everything. So it's all appearing. It's all like a perceptual cocktail, if you like. So yeah, so our conventional view is that's a representation of what's out there. But like we just said, that can never be experienced. So I'm not, we've got to be careful here because for me, this whole journey is about, it's not about replacing beliefs with new ones. It's just about kind of unpicking things. So, so from there, we don't now come to the conclusion that there is no out there, but neither do we come to the conclusion. It's like you're not now shifting all your eggs into a different basket, if you like. We just don't know. So we're coming into this innocence, this childlike innocence.
Yeah.
All we know is a direct experience. This right now.
Now, a little while ago, you said, well, it looks like, I'm looking at a cup or I'm looking at a tree, but really it's all consciousness interacting with itself.
Yes, so that's where we're going.
That needs some explanation.
Clarification. Yeah, so that's where we go now. So now we've broken down the subject into pure knowing, consciousness, whatever word we use. Mm-hmm. And now we've broken down the object into this a kind of softening, into just a play of sensation, a play of thoughts, feelings, like mind stuff, if you like.
Well, the object is a mind stuff and thoughts and feelings as far as our perception of it is concerned. But what I was kind of getting at before is the object doesn't really depend, or does it really depend upon our perception for its existence? The moon has been doing just fine, even before there were human beings that could really perceive it. It was.
It's a great question, but the thing is, I think you'll see where I'm going.
Okay.
I don't want to jump in and answer that because in the question itself, there's stuff in there. So by answering it, I'm kind of
you're unfolding this as you go along.
Yeah, I'm agreeing to the premise of the question. Okay. It's a bit like what we were saying earlier. So I could answer that, but it wouldn't be right, my answer, because it would be giving validity to certain assumptions in the question. So if we just now bring these seeming two together, so there's this knowing presence, and then there's this cocktail of perception. So what we can then do is, maybe with eyes closed, it might be easier, but just take maybe a sound. Sound is sometimes the easiest thing to play with. Maybe the sound of my voice, or if there's some traffic nearby, or a clock ticking, or whatever. And we're going to go with direct experience. So that means letting all of our assumptions, all of them, every single one, just drop away. So you don't even know what this is. You have no idea what this sound is right now, or where it is, or when it's going to begin or end. So that without any of those assumptions or predictions, there's just sound spontaneously appearing now. And it has this quality. Here it is. spontaneously appearing. And it's being known by this presence. So the first question to look at here is there a gap between these seeming two? Now, if we go into our concepts, then suddenly I'm a person sitting here on a chair, and the sound is a meter or half a meter away from me, and yeah, there's the gap. But if we come back into this first person experience again, now this consciousness, I can't say where it is, it's certainly not here between my eyes, that's a sensation. That's a sensation that is being experienced by this knowing presence. So this knowing that I can't point to and I can't say where it begins or ends, is there a gap between that and this spontaneously arising sound that I know nothing about? Where do I start my measurement? Do I start it here, from between my eyes? That's a sensation. That's not where I, presence, am. So you try this. Is there some kind of boundary between the two? Where does knowing end and sound begin? So for me, I was playing with this stuff, and then for some reason it just broke open, and it became utterly clear that this knowing and this sound are indivisible. The knowing is being the sound, and we can play with that with all the different kind of sense doorways, if you like. You can play with sensation, you can play with smell, taste, movement, the sense of movement. And yeah, even image, open eyes, colors, even colors. You can see that the presence that's knowing those colors is being those colors. So in a sense, there's nothing looking. There's nothing looking. There's what is sort of shimmering, shining, as it is. So this is the step from being that awareness to actually being what's happening, the experience itself. And we could call this experience, we could call this love, because it's that coming together of seeming separate things. Seeing that it's only, well, it's just what it is, wholeness, being what it is.
Having, you want to continue, or should I ask a question?
No, yeah, I'll go for it. Yeah, ask a question.
Well, a couple thoughts come to mind. One is, in terms of your own experience, when you're talking like this and leading people through a logic like this, it's kind of lively in the experience. But is this, I'll just ask you personally first, I mean, is this sort of way of seeing things spontaneous living reality for you throughout the day and night, or is it something more that you kind of psych yourself into when you're thinking this way?
Well, the way I see it, the being, consciousness, it kind of shapeshifts in sort of generally three different ways. It can come into being a focus, as if it's a person, and it can soften out as a sort of witnessing presence, like we were just talking about, like this stuff is happening and it's being observed, or it can go into being the whole experience. So that movement can always shift and change. So the idea of trying to hold on to some particular state, it seems to just disappear.
No, I'm not saying hold on. I'm just saying.
Yeah,
spontaneous. No, I like that though. It's the kind of the zoom lens analogy. You can zoom in, zoom out, according to the circumstances and the need.
It's infinite. It could do what it wants. Right. It's like all the doors are open. Why limit yourself?
Yeah. But then a second question is, you know how in the case of near-death experiences, some materialists will say, well, it's just the brain getting deprived of oxygen, and that's why you're seeing a tunnel of light and all that stuff. And similarly, one might say, well, yeah, you're sort of going through this analysis and you're gaining a sense of oneness, but that's really just sort of a subjective experience. And does that really correlate, or are you actually getting a kind of a peep into the oneness of reality as it is?
Yeah, that's what it seems like. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah. I mean, you know, I don't want to get stuck here, because this is like another step. I know there are no steps, but you know, so you can realize what we're talking about here, and then again, your life doesn't change, or maybe it does initially, and there's a kind of, you know, like a honeymoon, whoa, you know, wow, wow. And then you start to see that, okay, the old patterns are still coming back, you know, so and this can be a really hard place to be, because it's like, you know, what was all that about? You know, these realizations have dropped in, but I'm still left as the same idiot I was, or, you know, whatever it might be, you know, it's like, I'm still frustrated in the same ways and fall into the same patterns. And again, this is...
Are you though? Or does this open up a kind of a dimension of fulfillment that, you know...
Exactly,
right.
That's what I'm talking about. So there is that fulfillment, but the patterns still come back, basically. And people can get stuck there. So just like they can get stuck with the awareness, they can get stuck here, and then they start appealing to the nothing to do thing again. Yeah, and saying, okay, I've seen it. There's nothing to do. And then they just carry on suffering, basically. So my invitation is, no, come on, let's keep going. Let's not give up, you know, let's keep going.
Yeah.
And this is where, for me, the most interesting part begins. Because it's the psychological side, you know, it's like, it's almost like, for me, non-duality is the reverse of most other paths. You know, a lot of other paths, you get stuck into the psychology, you know, you start looking at your patterns and start, you know, doing all that stuff. And then the sort of hope is, you know, one day when I'm totally pure, I might realize wholeness or something. So what I love about non-duality, it just turns the whole thing around, and it says, no, you can realize what you are right now. It's abundantly available always and forever. It always has been. And then the invitation is, when you start to realize that, the way I see it is, you have the most extraordinarily powerful tool, if you like, to now really go deeply into all of that messy stuff, because you know what you are.
Yeah.
So I'll share a bit of my experience, but I'll tell you, if I'd have met what I've met without knowing what I am, God knows what would have happened, you know, yeah. Really.
Here's an analogy I like to use for that, which is that, let's say you have a handful of mud and you want to dissolve it, but you only have a cup of water. You throw the mud in the cup of water and it's just all mud, you know. But if you have an ocean to throw it in, you throw it in the ocean and it just dissolves. So what you're saying is this gives you the capacity for processing stuff much more elegantly and efficiently than...
Much more elegantly and efficiently, yeah, absolutely. Yeah. I mean, you know, no question about it.
Yeah, and it inevitably does process, doesn't it? I mean, you know, once this opening takes place, the evolutionary process, if we want to call it that, continues, and it's like, all right, now it's time for some house cleaning.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, so so maybe another image here. I've got this table I've drawn up for my book that I'm quite proud about, pleased about.
And incidentally, we talked about you singing a song or two here or there. So if we get to a point in this discussion where you feel like taking a break and singing a song, particularly if it relates to what we're talking about, just let's do.
Okay, great. Maybe now.
Oh yeah, okay. You all tuned up and ready to go?
It'd be a nice kind of sidetrack, huh?
Yeah, just get out of our heads for a minute, if that's where we are.
I always love that, get out of our heads, you know, because it's got such bad connotations, or it's seen as madness, but actually it's sanity in a sense. All hopes, all dreams, falling apart at the seams. Belief control. It's the end of pretending to know. Maybe is what ifs all become meaningless, and this life-long quest dissolving into emptiness. Losing it all, losing it all, losing it all again. Those eyes meet these, and the mind, it just falls to its knees. And this heart breaks in love with all it creates. No grab, no grip, it's all free to just be as it is. And this heart sings as nothing and everything. Losing it all, losing it all, losing it all again. Open another door. It's not what you're looking for. There is nowhere to go to not know. Yeah, losing it all, losing it all, losing it all again. And again. And again. Losing it all again.
Nice.
Thanks, Rick.
I was playing drums quietly as you were doing that. I used to play the drums.
Ah.
It's funny, there was one little line in there where you said no grip, and it reminded me of the experience I had when I was a teenager, where we were on LSD walking along in the middle of the night, and the sun was rising. We were walking down the street, and this friend of mine said, you know, there's no grip. There's no grip. He just kept saying that. And it's like, because everything was sort of flowing and changing and all. And I always thought if I ever talked to him again, I'd say, well, yeah, on that level there's no grip, but there is a level which doesn't change, you know, which is stable. And which gives sort of, which gives coherence and a foundation to the ever-changing world.
Yeah, so there's the paradox, isn't it?
Yeah.
There's the paradox. I'm just going to take this out for a second because I lost the other one.
Sure, yeah.
There you go. Back again.
Good.
Yeah.
So
I like to use the songs in the retreats actually. So we do a lot of guided meditation. You take things, you go deeper into the mind, so everything starts to loosen and open up. And then sometimes I like to cheekily slip in a song, you know, so that kind of blows the heart open as well.
Yeah, it does. It does. It
Yeah.
sort of creates a balance.
Yeah. Yeah, so I mean, we would get into this. So now, so in the play of our life, we go through the experience we go through. So, I mean, right from very young, when we have this fall. I like to call it second birth. You know, it's like when you're around sort of 18 months, where I've seen it with my own children. It's like you kind of, there's this magical world, a bit like what we're describing in a sense, but you actually don't have any concepts at all. I mean, what I'm talking about is you still retain your concepts, but you see through them. So they're downgraded from beliefs to just useful playthings. Whereas as a kid, you don't even have that. It's just experience, and it's this kind of like wondrousness, you know, and everyone's providing everything for you. So it's like a kind of magic world in a sense. And then there's this big fall, which is when we become a psychological self. So, you know, we start to take on the concepts of our culture and our environment, and we seem to lose this openness, this sense of wholeness. You know, and I actually think, you know, I've seen it with my two boys, this kind of rage that we go through, you know, and they call it the terrible twos. Yeah, I think it's like what the fuck's happened? You know, it's like really going crazy. It's like absolutely mad, like what's been lost, this fall. And of course, most people don't understand that. So when we see our little kid rolling around the floor going crazy, we kind of project forward to seeing a 16-year-old kind of burning houses, and you know, and we try and shut it down. You know, so but actually this is rage that wants to express. And I think in a sense this is where it all begins, because in losing wholeness in that sense, there can be a sense of inadequacy, like why has this happened to me? And then when we try and then suppress the rage that comes from it, it's like a confirmation. Oh, sorry, something's just happened.
That's a good analysis. I'd never heard that before, but it makes a lot of sense to me. I bet you.
You still got me. You can still hear me. Okay?
I hear you.
Okay.
I'll bet you that's what's really happening with kids at that age. Is they're just reacting to the extreme shutting down that they have experienced, considering, and especially if you have the sort of more esoteric view that we're born into this life from some, you know, in between state that's very unbounded and free and vast, and then we kind of come down into the earth plane, and it's very dense and constricted, and you know there must definitely be a reaction to that frustration.
Yeah, I absolutely. I mean, I think, you know, there is a way of maybe soothing that process, but I think it's inevitable. It doesn't matter how enlightened your parents are, you know, you're still going to have to go through that. And what I mean by that is, like with my youngest, sometimes he's 3 now, but when he was 2, sometimes he'd go into one of these rages for an hour and a half. And I would just sit close to him, make sure he didn't headbutt anything, or, you know, didn't hurt himself. And it was just amazing. After about an hour and a half, he would burn out. And then at one time, he'd just stop, he'd look at me, and he'd go, "Oh, Daddy, can I have a glass of water?" It's just like, done, you know, it's gone.
Interesting.
It just needed to get it out.
Yeah.
And if it's suppressed and it's pushed down, then all that energy is stuck in there, you know.
So what you did there sounds like the right thing to have done. Maybe you could elaborate on that as a father, as a parent.
Well, yeah, I mean, I think.
Would you say, you know, helping the child to feel secure and loved and
I wasn't doing anything. I was just.
But your presence.
Making sure that he didn't hurt himself, because he's like rattling around on the floor, you know.
And you're sitting.
Yeah,
right
and just
there.
holding it, holding the space, basically.
Yeah.
Just classic, holding the space.
Whereas if kids get yelled at or abandoned or shut in a room by themselves or something at that stage, it could be quite the opposite of what they need.
Yeah, and I mean, I don't mean this as a judgment on anyone, because everyone just does the best that they can do. But you know, maybe if if we knew that was what was going on, maybe we'd look at it in a different way. It doesn't mean our child is going to become some kind of crazy monster when they're older. They're just working out this utter rage at what's happened. But as I say, you know, even if you have this, even if it's managed in a nice way, and I think there's certain natural ways that that's done anyway, like, you know, peekaboo, things like that. These games are kind of universal all over the world. It's like, you know, is the world still there when I open my eyes again? And you're just kind of testing it.
Yeah.
You know, and like every dad knows, you know, the kids love being chased.
Right.
You know, and you pretend to be the ogre, you know, the baby thief, and they go ah and run off. and it's like a way of playing with, you know, no one's gonna abduct me and run off with me. You know, it's okay. You know, being this separate little thing, it's okay. It's like, so it's fascinating, all this stuff when you look into it.
Yeah.
But you know, like my experience, the conditioning comes in. It's the environmental, the sort of national, all that conditioning, it comes in. And so here we are deep down, because of this primary kind of trauma, in a sense, feeling somehow not enough. And then the conditioning comes in and we hide it. We just want to hide it. We just want to build a defense structure around it, you know, and so that's all the, you know, the beliefs we have, and the kind of our looks, how beautiful or ugly we are, how clever, stupid we are, all that stuff, and the roles we play. You know, mine was to try and be superior, to try and hide this kind of, you know, inner discontent. But you see, this is where my little thing comes in, because it's never enough, Rick, is it? I mean, it's like you can't do that, because underlying all of it is insecurity, because you know you're playing a game. So we're always trying to escape that discomfort. And so how do we do that? We do it by craving things, you know, whether it's money, people, lovers, houses, spiritual enlightenment. It's the same thing. Craving, or clinging on to, you know, what makes us feel safe, or just plain resisting, judging, pushing people away, whatever that we don't like or that threatens our sense of self, or just plain escaping, you know, shopping, like compulsively.
Yeah.
Shopping.
I guess one way of explaining it is that, you know, we crave fulfillment. The mind wants happiness, and you know, the Upanishads and scriptures like that say that there's really one source of happiness, and that's within. The self is the repository of all fulfillment, and that fulfillment we derive from external objects is a reflection of that, but it's not that. You know, it's like the moon reflects the light of the sun. And so we go chasing after all these reflections, but they can never be adequate because they're not the primary source, you know. And if you can find the primary source, then the whole, firstly, you find that happiness, or to put it in simple terms, but secondly, your whole relationship to objects changes, and they no longer have the sort of compelling quality that they once had, because they've been eclipsed by something much brighter, so to speak.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah. Absolutely, yeah. Yeah, but of course, if you've not been exposed to those teachings, or you don't know anything about those teachings, what you do is, what happened to me, you get stuck in a cycle. So maybe this is going to do it, and then maybe there's a temporary reprieve, but then you're back in discomfort as a separate me, and you just go round and round and round. And you know, I have a friend, he killed himself in his early 20s, and it's like, just found no way out of that loop. And so every time you go round, you get a bit more depressed or a bit more disillusioned, and then if you've got no other avenue out of that, I mean, where do you go? Maybe you just, like some people, just convince themselves that life's just a bit shit. You know, life's just boring. Or like a friend of mine told me the other day, so was it a kid, grandchild or something, was complaining that they were bored, and his dad's response was, "Life's boring." Like, get used to it, you know. It's like,
there's a saying, "Life sucks, then you die."
Exactly. So you know, maybe you convince yourself of that, and it's just, you know, you just carry on going round and round the wheel. You know, you go and see the football game, have a bit of a buzz on the weekend, go back to your daily grind, you know, and you think that's just what it is, and you just wait till you die, basically.
Yeah. Well, I think the more people can hear that that's not all there is, the better off we'll all be.
Yeah, exactly.
And all the great teachers throughout history have tried to tell people that you know, hey, I've discovered something great here, and you got to check this out.
Yeah.
I mean, putting it in contemporary terms, because life is so much more than you realize, and it's a shame to just squander it on trifles when there's this vast, you know, ocean of fulfillment that's right there, as close as your nose, you know.
Yeah.
Here's a nice little question. Oh, I'm sorry. Go ahead.
Yeah, I was just thinking that, when you were saying that, you know, this is where kind of religion is supposed to step in.
It's supposed to. Yeah.
But of course, what we know is it just becomes another part of the wheel, the cycle. You know, like you now have a religious belief that's part of your identity.
Well, I think they all started out with someone who actually was having that experience and talking about it, and then over the centuries they get objectified and they lose the inner core, and then, you know, they're like a sort of a body that's lost its spirit. It's rotting.
Yeah, it's all there. It's all there in the, you know, like you keep quoting the Upanishads, but it's all there in the New Testament.
Yeah,
you know, you could,
sure.
when you know what you're looking for, you can find it. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, of course.
Here's a question that came in from Mark Peters in Santa Clara, California. Mark often sends in good questions. This is related to what we were saying earlier. He said, why do you think that sight is the primary driver of the imagined sense of self?
Yeah,
the sense that I peer out from behind my eyes. Can you speculate as to why don't people experience that self as existing primarily in the mouth, the nose, the ears, or fingers? Even the language around apprehension is almost exclusively sight-driven. Oh, now I see the truth.
Yeah, it's definitely the stickiest sense.
It's the most predominant.
Yeah, it's the predominant sense, the one we rely on most of all.
Yeah, but you know, for a blind person, maybe it would be hearing that would.
Maybe.
Yeah.
Maybe. This would be an interesting thing to explore, but certainly with the people I work with, seeing is always the catch.
Yeah.
It's like they can really, even the sense of movement, smell, taste. Yeah, it's all happening. It's like literally this presence is being that, and as soon as they open their eyes, it's like, here I am again, here looking out. But what also adds to that conviction is nice that it came up right now. Actually, is where we're going, because there's a sort of density that these patterns and these patterns that we're talking about, we're coming to, they sort of create a density physically, which seems to bring a kind of center into the experience. Yeah, and that married to the sort of perceptual field that seems focused here creates that conviction that we're in this little fragment of the experience exclusively. Yeah, I mean, look, for example, I've just had an idea. I can just pick this camera up. This room's a bit of a mess, but
Gonna show it around.
Here I go, show you around, right? So look, what's happening? You're not moving.
Right.
But if you were sitting in an IMAX cinema right now, you know, as that moves like that, it would be as if you were turning your head.
Yeah.
But you, the screen, you haven't moved, you haven't turned anywhere. You're just what you are, like what you always were. And all the colors dance to give the as if experience of moving your head. So actually the visual is exactly the same as all the other sort of sense doorways, if you like. We call it sense doorways, why not?
Sure.
Yeah. But yeah, I think the stickiness is because we're so used to interpreting in that way, and this density of the body that brings in a kind of extra conviction. So good question.
Yeah. There's a couple little tidbits on that question. It is said that sight is the most predominant sense, and that's why people close their eyes when they meditate. And also it's said that that all the senses have subtler levels to them. Like you can have subtle visual perceptions or subtle auditory perceptions and so on. And it's said that that we're more familiar with the subtler aspects of the sense of hearing, most of us, than we are with the subtler aspects of other senses. And that's what thoughts are. Thoughts are actually a sound, but a subtler aspect of using the very same sense that with which we hear external sounds, we hear thoughts, so to speak, in the mind. We're picking up on a subtler aspect of the sense of hearing, and that's why the use of a mantra is often used in different traditions for transcending the senses altogether, because we're already at a subtler level if we're thinking a thought, and we can pick it up from there and drop down all the way. Just a little tidbit.
Nice.
Here's a question for you from a student of yours. He says, James is my teacher, and of course I feel that he is the best. So this guy's going to get extra prasad or something. But
who is that?
Jitendriya Bell.
Jitendriya.
From Devon says, or asks, could you say something about the fine line between a healthy earnestness and longing to come home to one's true nature?
Yeah, that's a great
That's the first part of the question. And contrasting that with a willful, I am going to get this, damn it, that kind of attitude.
Yeah, so this is great. This is a great question. So this is where we're heading. So, just like you've just been saying, Rick, the way out of this cycle, for me, the way we talk about it when we in our meetings is just stop. We just stop. Stop the kind of endless wheel. Just stop, and we just explore, just as we've been doing throughout this interview. First the subject, then the object. We just explore, and then that leads us into this starting to recognize the patterns that we play in life. Where these patterns are happening, what's going on, and if you're in a relationship with kids, it's great for seeing your patterns. Christ, all your buttons get pushed, everything comes up, and then what you can start to do is it's like you're tracing it back. Like what's at the root of this, and what you discover. We go to the beach a lot around here, which is quite close to the sea, and it's a nice analogy. You get these sea anemones, and they're stuck to the rock. And it's like this solid kind of splodge of stuff, and then all these tentacles kind of reaching out from there. And so I see these patterns are like those tentacles. And if you go back, and this is what actually the kind of guided meditations can help with. You sort of going into deeper layers of the mind, you can get back to these kind of energetic knots in the mind. So this is where you discover that guilty, shameful, totally just deficient kind of child, or if you like. It's like an energetic holding somewhere in the mind, but also mirrored physically in the body. So you'll find it physically in the body. So this is where, like we were just saying, the beauty of what you've realized, this presence, is just there. Just shining, welcoming, if you like, we could use whatever words, lovingly welcoming that belief system, that energetic contraction, that holding, to come home, back into wholeness. It's just welcomed in. And I mean, that sounds easy to say, but often with so much resistance to even seeing that contraction. Because it's like being found out, it's like being revealed. So what happened for me was, even after all the things we talked about, even after seeing that very clearly, doing this, just kind of seeing patterns, just dropping back, just for the love of it, dropping back deeper, coming to that, really facing that energetic contraction. And this is where that question comes in. I found myself at one point, this sounds funny now, I used to actually visually see a shivering child, like almost like a... kind
of your inner child, so to speak?
Yeah, like a fetus almost, like this kind of terrified thing. And I knew it was like like the portal into the real depths. And I found myself one day just going, like in the meditation's voice going, show me, show me, show me.
Sounds like that 2-year-old there.
Yeah, but it was this really strong kind of like drive, you know. It was that drive that I'd had my whole life, and in the bizarrely, it did show me, and what it showed me, it was that drive. It was that drive that was, in a way, you know, like Newton's third law: what you action reaction, what you push pushes back, and it was that drive, like show me, you know. And it showed me, that's it. That's what I was still clinging on to. That was what was energizing that knot. And in seeing that, it's just like a softening, just just an allowing for it to be however it wanted to be. And then things opened up. I could go further there.
Yeah. I find there's an interesting balance that one learns to strike between earnestness and surrender. You know, I mean, Patanjali in his Yoga Sutras talks about yogis with vehement intensity being those who realize most quickly. And yet, you know, that could lead a person to struggle and strain and be very unnatural and beat oneself over the head, you know, figuratively speaking. And yet, you know, the crowd that we were talking about earlier say, there's nothing to do. You just sort of, they could sit around forever waiting for something to happen. So there's a kind of a balancing act that one, I say, kind of develops into, and at least in my own experience, between, I mean, I'm just totally enthusiastic about this stuff. My wife will tell you, it's all I think about. I read books about it all the time. I interview people. I just love it. And yet, I have no sense whatsoever, although I used to, of gotta have this or I'll die. You know, there's not sort of a trying to break down the gates of heaven kind of.
Well, that's the difference.
Yeah, it's more like really enjoying the ride here, and I love it, and I'm enjoying the scenery and totally eager and interested, and yet at the same time, just I'm not in the driver's seat, and so I'm just relaxing and enjoying the ride.
Yeah, great. You're in your zone.
Yeah, if that's a good metaphor.
Rick, you're in your zone.
Yeah. So there's a balance, and people who are struggling and straining, maybe lighten up a bit. You know, go see a movie, listen to some music. People who are doing nothing, better do something. You know, read a book, get focused, go to a satsang. There's some kind of a mixture you can find that.
I would say you have to keep struggling and straining until you fundamentally realize it's not getting you anywhere.
Maybe that, yeah.
Yeah, that's the way I see it. You can't advise. I mean, maybe you could suggest something, but we have to see it for ourselves. You know, we have to realize it for ourselves. I mean, I think people probably been telling me for years, James, you're so driven. It's like,
just lighten up, dude.
Yeah, come on, mate, like just loosen up. But I couldn't hear it because I had to be driven in my mind.
Yeah.
You know, because drive was how I.
I mean, are you driven now in some way, shape, or form?
Yes, I'm a bit like you, Rick, in that, you know, I love this stuff, and I love meeting people and holding meetings, retreats. I love music, playing songs. Yeah, and actually this, in a way, this is where it leads, actually, because when you can drop, when you're not, I call this cycle we're talking about, the cycle of reactivity. So when you're not functioning in that way anymore, when you're not living a reactive life, and most of us are living reactive lives, so everything we're doing, the motivation is to escape that discomfort often. And so when that's not an issue anymore, then you have the opportunity to actually authentically act. So you're not driven by reactivity. And so then, you know, like the stuff you're doing, the stuff I'm doing, it can really blossom, because it's not being restrained by these this kind of knot in the psyche that's, you know,
it's not being done out of a sense of emptiness or
it's just celebration.
Lack. Yeah, it's being done out of a sense of fullness and celebration, best word.
Yeah, celebrating the joy and wonder of being.
Yeah. Yeah. Nice.
Yeah, I mean, I just want to add a little bit to what I just said then, because I don't really talk about experiences very much, because I think it can be so misleading, and I certainly seen that when I was really voraciously seeking, and people would go on, you know, like talking forever about their awakening experience. But I think it's worth just mentioning something here, because when I saw through that pattern, what opened up was quite extraordinary. It was like people who might be going through this or have been through it, might be nice for them to hear. It was just like demonic destruction, like on a just devastation. You know,
What was?
I get a lot of images when I'm sitting, and
I see.
and you know, just like crazy demons kind of ripping people apart, and planets, and just like total utter devastation.
Sounds like
And
the
it's
11th
almost,
chapter of the Bhagavad Gita.
yeah. Oh right, okay. I must read it at some point. But you know, like hell realms or something. Just like it's almost like all the repressed stuff in the mind just going. And this is what I mean about knowing what you are. You just, it's like the smiling Buddha. You just sit there and it all just does whatever it wants to do. But I mean, Christ, it's full on.
That's what confronted him before his enlightenment, actually, the Buddha. You know, all these sort of demons and wild stuff was coming at him, and he was just sitting there like a rock. You know, I'm not going to let this sway me.
Yeah, and going back to what we were saying earlier, if you'd have done it the other way around, I mean, that would just be so
you wouldn't have the
There's
capacity.
no way you could stay with that. You would just run off. You think you've gone mad and just check yourself into the nearest sanatorium. It's like, you know.
People do.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
Good point. Good point.
Yeah. So how do you support yourself? Are you like a full-time spiritual teacher, or do you all have some kind of...
I am now, yeah. I am
good.
now.
Got enough activity with that?
Just about scraping it at the moment.
You look well fed. You're not starving to death. Got a few mouths to feed there.
Yeah. No, it's good. It's going well. But you know, just to finish that off, it's never finished. You know, this is an endless deepening, like we were saying earlier. So you know, even after that experience, and actually, it did. After that, there was a kind of bit of a collective suffering thing. You know, tapping into some greater suffering.
People go through that. They feel like,
Yeah.
I've worked through my stuff. Now I seem to be processing the world. You know.
Something like that. I don't know what was going on there. And then lots of biblical images like Jesus on the cross, you know. And then the last layer for me was just fucking rage. Like really vicious rage. And I had this image of like a metal fist, huge metal fist, just like pounding.
Were you expressing it overtly, or were you just sort of processing it inwardly?
No, I was just sitting there, like it was all going on in the mind, you know. And that was the message is, why hast thou forsaken me? It's like, why the fuck, you know? And then of course, then that's when everything just, and it's just, for me, it was just light. It was just nothing but light, and the sense of being. This is interesting as well. Being embraced by the Father. So whether that's, you know, because in my own life, there's a sense of needing to be embraced, loved by my own Father, and then presence being the miracle that it is, it kind of mirrors what's needed somehow. I don't know, but that was the kind of where it finished.
Yeah. So this is interesting. I had kind of glossed over this during most of the interview, because it sounded like you were just going to, you know, non-duality meetings and sort of working through this in your mind. But it sounds like you really went through an inner meditative cooking process, you know, in which you actually sat there and didn't get dissuaded by all the stuff that was coming up, but plowed through it, burned through it, and eventually broke through into the clear.
Yeah, and all of that happened after the non-duality stuff, you see.
Right. It sort of lit a fuse.
That's why that's really important to make that point. So it's like you can see the reality of experience, the nature of reality, and you keep going. It's like then you go down into those depths, and what was really beautiful actually, like the next after that had happened, I could see that drive pattern occasionally sort of fade in, like trying to sort of reassert itself. And it's almost like a stick. I could see if you pick any of it up, any of the pattern up, you get the whole enchilada, as they say. You know, you get the knot and everything. And this is really interesting, because it's like what happens is the love of being what you are is so strong that you lose the taste for picking up the pattern. You just lose the taste. It's like sugar in your tea, you know. It's like, so you have two lumps and you go down to one, and then you go down to none, and you get used to it, and it's like, yes, this is what I like. And someone you haven't seen for a while gives you a cup with two sugars in, and you're like, I don't, no, thank you. You just lose the taste for it. And I think it's so it comes from love, not
so in
from
that
this
metaphor you're saying you lose the taste for old patterns of reacting
pattern,
and behaving and so on and so forth.
And the important thing is to say, I'm not saying it's like done, it's a done deal, it's like that's it, end of story. I think that's a really big misnomer. I know, and there's always, who knows, I mean, it's the infinite mind, you know, anything can happen. It's always, it could pop up as anything, you know, it could be anything. So it's just another idea. Oh, it's done. Another idea. It's another idea.
I've told this joke before. My friend Francis Bennett likes to say, how do you know you're done? Did someone stick a fork in you? But I think this point you're making is an interesting one, in that what you're saying essentially, in a nutshell, to reiterate, is that you know, an awakening happens, and then it's as if the vehicle within which that awakening happens, the old vehicle is no longer quite adequate to support it, and so the vehicle has to be cleaned and has to be transformed and has to be purged of all kinds of stuff that no longer belongs there in this more awakened state. So all that stuff has to get blown out, and it can be pretty intense.
Yeah. Although the vehicle thing is a bit, it's a tricky one, isn't it? Because then we're back into, like, consciousness is in here.
Yeah, but I mean, whatever this is, it's being,
I understand what you mean.
Being lived through a nervous system, through a psyche, through a human mechanism. It's somehow, you know, is supporting this experience, and I mean, consciousness exists irrespective of the mechanism. It's always existed. It's eternal foundation of the universe. But if it's going to be a living reality, then it's a living reality through through a person. and when we talk about progress, we're not talking about consciousness progressing. We're talking about the capacity to live it progressing. And that may necessitate a lot of transformation.
I hear you completely. But where this has taken me is so where do we go from there?
Well, there's a question someone asked, but I don't want to take you off track.
Yeah, I mean, it's similar to the questions you were saying before about, you know, lots of different, like the fox and the squirrel looking at the tree and the person looking at the tree. So, you know, I had the classic question, if you really, I mean, it's an obvious question, really. If you're saying this is all an appearance and there's no kind of experience of a material external reality that this is representing, then you can get yourself into this kind of area where, you know, you're verging on solipsism now. It's like there's only this, you know. So Rick is just colors and sounds, you know, and so, you know, this is like, whoa, you know, where's this going? So I found myself looking into that really deeply, and what it sort of seems to come down to is, for me, the guiding light is always direct experience. Okay, so we think direct experience is saying, oh, there's, you know, Rick's just colors and sounds. He hasn't got thoughts because I'm not directly experiencing them. You see. But what we're doing there is not direct experience. We're still conceptualizing. We're still, you know, talking about Ricks and Jameses, and even though we might think now they're not material things, they're kind of consciousness things, but we're still piecing up life into bits.
Seems to me we're also placing our perceptual angle at the center of the universe, as if the existence of everything else depends upon whether or not we perceive it. So then people talk about this. So let's just keep with that.
Because what I'm doing is taking thought right to the end here.
Mm-hmm.
So instead of, it goes back to the similar question before when the guy was talking about the perceptual field,
Mm-hmm.
you know. So if we're actually true to direct experience, then we're not cutting out things anymore. Yeah. So what creates the seeming perceptual field? If we're not cutting those things out, there's not a this and a that placed here in relation to this. What we're kind of dissolving that overlay. What we're left with, we could say, is, I don't know, appearing colors, appearing sounds, sensations, thoughts, feelings. So I'm not putting any labels on them as things. Okay, stay with me.
Mm-hmm.
But then, you could say even those things I've just said, like colors, sound, those are labels. Yeah. So if we let go of those labels too, we could say there's like one appearance appearing, if you like.
And even appearance is a label.
Exactly, because then you have to go to the concept of a somewhere else,
Right.
where the appearance appears from and disappears too. So in the end, that falls apart. So all you're left with is pure consciousness, like being, isness, whatever you want. And when you're at that point, none of these questions can arise, because, you know, the question of others can only arise out of the conviction of a myself.
Mm-hmm.
So without stepping into any of those conceptualizations, here you are. What's left is you, capital Y, you that is, presence, being. Mm-hmm. And there's a real beauty in that, because even to call it presence, of course, is now to label it. So then,
sure.
You know, that's already putting a circle around it. So you're just left with it's just like speechless in wonder at what is.
Yeah.
Now, then we can dance. We can, if you want to put a model on it, go for it. Enjoy it. Put a model on it. Like all the models we were just speaking about earlier. This is where it led for me. It's like, go for it, big time. Come up with a really great model, you know, just go for it. And it happens that the conventional model that we live by has big flaws. And the big flaws are that we immediately see ourselves as separate little units rather than this global consciousness. So, you know, you could play with that. You could try and introduce a completely new world model into a new paradigm. You know, just like, you know, we talk about the Earth is flat, the Earth is spherical. The sun moves, the sun moves around the Earth. No, the Earth moves around the sun. These huge paradigm shifts that have happened, you know, throughout history.
But they didn't happen overnight.
Didn't happen overnight.
People were burned at the
Absolutely.
stake for trying to introduce them. So these things take a while.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely. But the point is that I want to make is they're models. And that's beautiful and that's wonderful, and we can play with that. But as soon as we start to invest and that model gets upgraded to a belief, then we're going to find ourselves back in the same position again.
Yeah. I think the safeguard is be true to your own experience and don't settle for beliefs. And if something is presented that you aren't experiencing, take it as a hypothesis, which means something interesting to explore. And you'll see whether it works out or not. But if you start hanging on believing things that you don't actually experience, then that has created a whole lot of trouble over the years for humanity.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Yeah. That's going back to that Chinese proverb that's right at the start, you know. It's like, you've got to involve me. Right. And I have to see it. I have to see it.
Yeah. And we should add that, you know, all the great religious leaders throughout history and spiritual leaders, they didn't care what you believed. They wanted you to experience what they were experiencing, not believe what they were saying. They wanted you to have the experience they were having.
Yeah, and if you follow your actual experience right to the end, that's where you end up.
Yeah.
And then, you know, to say anything about it is going in, as soon as I speak, I'm going into a model. Mm-hmm. And that's okay. That's beautiful. You know, look at the conversation, a rich conversation we can have, playing with these ideas and concepts and exchanging them. And, you know, and you can't, you know, the pre second birth psychological self baby can't do that.
Yeah.
So it's like, it's part of the game, if you like, part of the play, part of the celebration.
Let me hit you with another question that David Pinney from Wales sent in, and then maybe you could sing another song, and then we'll wrap it up, because we're getting down to about 2 hours or so. And if there's anything else you want to say that you haven't said, say it, and say it also before you sing the song. But David asks or says, the phrase "awareness of awareness" always baffles me. I see it as potentially leading to an infinite regress. Do you see this phrase as having any useful content?
Yeah, I think it's useful for people to rest. You know, we were talking right at the beginning, when you start to realize that there's a knowing or awareness here, that's knowing sounds, sensations, thoughts. And what often happens is, when we say be aware of the awareness, people start looking for something, because that's what they're used to doing, looking for something. But of course, you'll never find it as something, because it is always aware of the something. So it's actually, funnily enough, the cessation of that movement of looking, and the kind of resting, the softening, the easing, and just it's kind of dropping into what's already here, what you already are, that you don't need to look out to see, because you already are it. So I actually prefer the word knowing, because it's like, knowing is what you are. You are knowing. Knowing is the substance of what you are. So it doesn't need something to step outside itself to look in on itself. So there is no need for infinite regress, because the substance of knowing is knowing. So it's knowing. It's doing knowing.
Yeah.
But this is the real tricky thing, is because we're so conditioned into focusing. Be aware of awareness. So let's focus into awareness. It's the opposite. It's defocus. It's a relaxation.
It's relaxing in, yes. I think this also has pertinence to Ramana Maharshi's self-inquiry thing. A lot of people hear that and they start, all right, who am I? Where am I? You get this whole sort of, inner searching thing, looking for a something. Whereas I think really what he might have advocated was just what you described, a sort of a relaxing in, where the subject-object split can just dissolve in presence or in wholeness.
Yeah, beautiful.
Yeah. Do you want to take us out with another song?
Yeah.
What'll it be, ukulele or guitar?
Yeah, let's mix it up. Let's have a bit of ukulele.
Okie dokie.
We won't do a rendition of Somewhere Over the Rainbow like we were doing before.
Right. Yeah, before the interview we were singing that Hawaiian guy's Somewhere Over the Rainbow.
This one, so this is kind of related to what we were just talking about in terms of going in.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. When your heart is breaking and your world is shaking, when you wanna run a million miles away, when your ground is crumbling, with every step you're stumbling, when you've got nothing left to hold on to, just feel it all coming on. When you feel it so deeply and open completely, you're home again, as the love that you've been longing for. when all you feel is sadness, when you don't believe in anything anymore, when the pain is aching and your body is shaking, when you don't see a reason for living anymore, just feel it coming on. When you feel it so deeply and open completely, you're home again, as the love that you've been longing for. Just feel coming on. When you feel it so deeply and open completely, you're home again. You're home again. You're whole again, as the love that you've been longing for.
That was nice.
Thanks, Rick.
Really enjoyed it. And I really enjoyed this whole interview. It's kind of like I feel like we're old buddies or something. We're having this,
Yeah.
you know, kind of like casual conversation. It's great.
That's the funny thing with this stuff, isn't it? I mean, you know, I go all over the place, and you know, it's always familiar.
Yeah, yeah.
Always.
It's a nice thing. Okay, so let me wrap it up then. So I've been speaking with James Eaton, and apologies to those who I noticed some message came in. Hey, was this only 14 minutes long? So somebody didn't pick up the streaming again after it got interrupted. But the whole thing will be on the web soon, and within a week or so, with all the glitches edited out. And if you want to get in touch with James, I'll be putting a page up for him on batgap.com, as I always do, with links to his website and whatever else he wants me to link to. And do you, in addition to like doing stuff locally there in the UK, do you do Skype sessions with people all over the world and stuff?
I do actually, yeah. You can, through the website, you can find out about that and connect up.
Okay, good.
Yeah.
People can do
I
that.
do meetings, like retreats in parts of Europe as well. If you're in Europe, I haven't been to the States yet, but maybe someday, I don't know.
Yeah. Following Rupert's footsteps, you'll be over here. So good. So next week I will be interviewing one of the founders of Findhorn, or is it pronounced Findhorn? I think it's Findhorn.
I'm there next week.
Are you? You going to talk
Yeah.
up there or something?
Yeah, I got a 3-day retreat.
Oh,
Yeah.
cool. Yeah. I'm embarrassed to say the guy's name has slipped my mind at the moment, although I had it on the tip of my tongue. But anyway, I'll be interviewing him next week. After that, I'll be going off to the Science and Non-Duality conference and doing a bunch of things with Adyashanti and others. And those will all be going up on Batgap as well. So thanks for listening or watching, and we'll see you next week. Thanks, James.
Thanks.
Talk to you later.
Cheers.